Welcome back to the latest edition of The Audible presented by Trader Joe's. I'm Bruce Feldman. He's Ralph Russo. We are going to get into Ralph's AP Top 25 ballot in a little bit and a few other things. Somebody's missing. Oh, you know what it is? Stu's not here. I think if there's reports of a man in Northern California who looks vaguely like Dave Matthews if he really let himself go trying to do cartwheels all over down the street, it's because Stu is reacting to North Carolina getting annihilated in Bill Belichick's first game, and he is feeling really smart because he's probably done 9 columns about why he thinks it's going to bomb, and he might be right. Ralph.
Dude,
was he right?
I mean, I was just going to come on here with a sign that said Stu was right. I really don't even know where to start, Bruce. That was so bad. And again, we'll do the whole, hey, it's only one game. It's literally Bill Belichick's first game at North Carolina. There's a long way to go. I mean, I get all of that. It's not even just that 48-14, right? 48-14 final score. Most
it was
points,
41-7 at one point, right?
The most points a Bill Belichick team in general has ever allowed was in this game. And not just as a head coach, like as any coach on a staff, even. I think now I can't remember if the stat was as a head coach or just a Bill Belichick. I took it to mean as a head coach. Because he has been on a lot of
games. Yeah,
I mean, I was a head coach for 20 years. I think there was a lot of stark things in that. There were a lot of things that were really troubling. We've watched enough football over the years, Bruce, that there are times when you can even see a blowout game and think to yourself, well, they turned it over 4 times. They had a punt blocked. It was a mess. It was incompetent. But, if you clean up some of those things, it's a little fluky. Things get a couple of pick sixes. There was a pick 6. I think there was a couple of defensive touchdowns, but the dominance on the line of scrimmage from play to play for North Carolina was what was really disconcerting for me. North Carolina scored on its first drive, looked great. It looked like everybody was a genius, right, for making this hire. And then they don't get a first down for about 5 or 6 drives, and TCU is just doing anything it wants. And finally, North Carolina gets a garbage time touchdown later on. It just, that would be the most troubling thing for me. And it almost looked like the players kind of quit a little bit in the second half. So I don't know. It was very troubling of a debut, even though I had relatively low expectations.
Yeah, I think that, they obviously scripted the first series. That looked good. They moved down to the field pretty efficiently. Gio Lopez is like 2 for 2 for 35 yards. They hit some nice runs. Like, okay, maybe this is what we're expecting. And coming into the game, one thing that was like in my head a little bit was, Bill Belichick's protege, Matt Patricia, had a great weekend. And that was a questionable, hire. And he was going up against Sark. Now, granted, he has really good players, even if he has Caleb Downs and a bunch of guys who are going to get drafted, even if they're replacements from last year's draftees, but they looked really good. What you said is true. Like, they couldn't tackle. They were getting mauled, and it did look like, they were never this bad. I felt like when Mac Brown was the head coach. Right.
I looked it up, Bruce. The worst loss they ever had under Mac was by 29. In the second stint of Mac was by 29 points. And that was in the ACC championship game against Clemson in 2022. Now, they had Drake May and Amari Hampton. So that's some talent there. But still, that's Clemson. I don't expect TCU. TCU's a good Big 12 team, but to be like sort of physically overmatched by TCU was not what I was expecting.
TCU did to Bill Belichick's team what Kirby Smart did to TCU in SoFi a couple of years ago. It was like 65-7.
Yeah, it wasn't quite that bad. That was one of the ugliest things I've ever seen. But yes, it was in the ballpark of that. It was reminiscent of that.
That's what this felt like, though. Yeah. Like it felt. Then there was other moments of the night. Like you get this weird buildup where I get why ESPN was doing it, but like in the pregame, it's not the roast of Bill Belichick, but it's like you got Randy Moss, you got Teddy Bruschi, you have Pat McAfee, who basically employed Belichick, and Mike Lombardi, by the way, who's been the most visible GM probably in college football. Like he's on a lot of shows and he's out and about, and so there was this, and you go through, they pick the game, and Desmond, good on Desmond. He was the only one who got it right, and he was the only one who picked TCU. And then at one point, as the broadcast starts to go, you can tell it's like this awkward thing about like, it was almost like tough for Reese Davis and Kirk at one point to kind of say the obvious, what everyone's just sitting here saying and looking at. We're texting with people. I'm getting texts from other people about how embarrassing this looks for Belichick. But it's, you sit there and go, man, like, is this going to, I'm sure it can't get any worse than this, right? But like you have, Gio Lopez is a really good quarterback. He's never been under center, almost never been under center. And you're wondering, you just felt like they were like trying to ram it between the tackles. They got him after spring. I think they have, this is not what, when Deion took over at Colorado, they were god awful. Now he brought some really good players, obviously, with his son and Travis Hunter from Jackson State. The only parallel to me besides opening up with TCU was both his team and this team looked like they were terrible on the O-line. Like they couldn't block. They couldn't really get much done. Now, the difference is he had really good players, and I do think, it felt like they had, like this was that, that expression, all hat and no cattle. It was just so much of a production about this. Everyone was having fun with the empty depth chart and everything like that. It was just like, in the end, it was like, I'm curious how they bounce back. They have Charlotte next. Charlotte got destroyed by App State this past weekend. Yeah. So I don't know.
So our colleagues at The Athletic a couple of months back tried to do a personnel story on like, here's the roster, right? Again, there's 70 new players. So we're talking to personnel folks. Hey, what do you think of this transfer and that transfer? And you look at the offensive line, it's a guy from Troy and a guy from Holy Cross. And
a guy from Rice.
That doesn't mean they can't play at all, because teams are doing this, right? They're piecing together. Florida State just pieced together an offensive line, but of course they had a Vanderbilt guy and an Ole Miss guy. So it was. I think the general takeaway, if I remember the story, was it looks like it's okay. Like there's no real standouts here. I know you like Gio Lopez, and
I like Gio because I know a lot of people in the either in the Sun Belt or who looked at him thought he was really, really good relative to, one of the guys said he thinks he's better than Mensah, who obviously, went from the group of 5 level to Duke. But I think one guy's in a system that looks like it's favorable for him as a quarterback. Freddie Kitchens is an interesting hire here. We'll see how it plays out, but it did not look good tonight.
So I guess the question becomes like, how much of it is they just don't have talent? And I have a hard time believing they are just completely bereft of talent. But again, they have like 60 or 70 new players. A couple of the holdovers, Chip, the wide receiver, like a 4-star kid. Hood was a 3-star kid.
He was a pretty big recruit. He was a sizable recruit. Also, it's like, Ralph, you had Mike Lombardi, and they're talking about the 33rd team.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
The Super Bowls.
Yeah. It just seems so embarrassing, to have all that bravado to lead into this. And again, like, I don't think they're bereft of talent, and this guy is supposed to be able to coach. So where's the disconnect? And is it something that necessarily maybe gets better throughout the season? This looked terrible, but they have 11 more games, and a lot of them are not that super tough. They have a relatively favorable schedule outside of Clemson. So do you think there's a path for it to get better here?
I do, because look,
I guess it can't get worse.
It probably can't get worse, but I do think, we're talking about the greatest coach in the history of the NFL, right? And yes, he had Tom Brady, and Tom Brady looks better and better every time Bill Belichick coaches a game, to be honest. But, as if the guy already wasn't like a legend, but now people are kind of looking at it going, well, what's this? And maybe some of this is, he's in his mid-70s. He's not 65. And this is a different game. It was not kind of lost on me that some of the guys he was coaching against, the coordinators, like Kendall Briles, when I think of a college offense, that's what he does. And a lot of times that is feel like it's a derogatory term, college offense, because now you're going up against NFL and you're so much more sophisticated. But a lot of times that stuff, when it works, I just remember the story of one of the Alabama assistants was talking about, who had been with Hugh Freeze, and when Nick Saban had kind of tried to download this guy while he was interviewing him for a job about like, no, really, what's Freeze doing? And because he'd beaten him twice, he was like, no, this is it. It's not brain surgery. You're overthinking that. This is what he's doing. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes in college, it's like, it's simple, play fast. And I think some of those other things just kind of flow into it. And like you said, the schedule is not really that hard even by ACC standards. So I think he will make adjustments and react. And they do have some players. It's not like this is a terrible roster. So I still think they have a chance to make a bowl game. But Stu is the part where I'm going to have a hard time facing Stu is, like, he is in his mid-70s, and if it looks this bad right away, like right out of the gate, I think it's harder to sell going forward. Like, it just kind of takes a lot of air out of the balloon. Like, his quarterback commit coming in next year, Travis Burgess, was an Elite 11 kid, impressive kid, military kid, got a kid from a military family. He led his high school at the highest level in Georgia to a state title last year. He got a bad knee injury, so he's going to be out for the rest of the season. But I'm just thinking of like kids like that. I'm not saying he's going to decommit, but I think it's harder for them. Somebody's going to go, yeah, you're really going to go there. Like the game is kind of, I know he's great, but this is not the Belichick who is coaching Tom Brady.
So here's my last thought on this, because I don't know if we need to go 30 minutes on this one, Bruce. Brendan Marks, our colleague, and I wrote a story about how the premise was, can Bill Belichick, can the greatest NFL coach of all time, turn North Carolina into a football school? And it touches on a bit. It was more about investment and things along those lines, and changing the culture of North Carolina sports fandom. But it did touch on something that you had just mentioned. That's the enthusiasm. There's this feeling that they made this hire to create this incredible enthusiasm. But there's also an acknowledgement among everybody at North Carolina that you still have to win. And you have to win quickly, and you kind of have to win kind of big to get the people, the fans, to stay invested, and then to get the investors, literally the investors, to keep investing. And they also understand that there's a small window here. That nobody is under the delusion that this is going to be a 5-year deal. They're thinking we have about 2 to 3 years for him to set us off like a rocket, get things in place that will create a ton of enthusiasm, create a ton of investment, and then we'll go off, and then he'll hand it off a program that is much better situated than when he took over, and that's how we will change the trajectory of North Carolina football long term. And it's just again, it becomes so deflating when you see it's the third quarter and fans are leaving, and it's like, oh, same old North Carolina football.
Street's dog had the headset on at the end of the game.
Like these people are not
watching that.
Yes, these people are not here for the long run. Like the North Carolina fans are fickle when it comes to this program, and if it's not producing, this is going to dry up quickly. So didn't go well first time out. It's far from over. Maybe in 6 weeks, we'll look back and go, wow, can you believe that this team is the same team that got crushed by Sonny Dykes? I think Sonny was enjoying this, by the way.
I'm sure he was.
But yeah, it's just interesting to think about the immediacy of the need of all that enthusiasm and what they were looking for, and to see it felt like it all came crumbling down in a couple of hours.
Yeah, I was just thinking, if you're Bubba Cunningham, the AD, you're like, I ruined a perfectly good suit for this. I cut the sleeves off to look like one of the Flintstones.
Oh, man. What a night. Well, we will hit, when we're done with this, now that we're done with this, we're going to get into how I'm ranking the teams this week in the AP poll. We're going to look at next week's schedule. We're going to talk a little bit about another disaster going on at Tuscaloosa and what might be next for for Alabama with Kalen DeBoer. But we'll be back right after this with Stu, by the way. Well, thanks for joining us, Stu, for the rest of the podcast. Appreciate you showing up for work.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm sure it's confusing to people that we've gone from night to day here in reverse. Thanks, guys. Thanks for this is true story. So obviously I'm working most of the weekend, right? My wife and daughter are on their own, and they were going to have my daughter's really good friend and her mom, who's my wife's really good friend, over on Monday, on Labor Day, to swim. But it was really hot on Sunday, so she said, hey, if you want to just come over today, that's fine. When they came over, I heard her say, hey, we're going to come back again tomorrow. And I jokingly said, you want us to, make a bed for you guys? And my daughter seized on that. Oh, sleepovers. Let's have a sleepover. So they had a sleepover. My wife obviously had to supervise it because I was working. So it was I think, smart of me to skip the night podcast to take care of my daughter, put her to bed.
Totally fine. We used to do a lot of sleepovers. Our daughter, a little older than Stu's, but we had an only child, so we encouraged sleepovers because it kind of gave them the feel of having like a sister in the house or something like that. So we used to do a lot of sleepovers. So yes, totally fine. You're kind of excused for hosting a sleepover. How often do you and Bruce do sleepovers? I'm just wondering. I know you're not that far from one another. I can see like you and Bruce, like, getting the sleeping bags out.
Why does everybody think we live in the same city?
I know
this
you're
is a common
far
mistake.
away. I know you're far away, but I could see a road trip for a sleepover, and one day
6-hour road trip for a sleepover. I think people who don't live in California seem to think the Bay Area and LA are like a hop, skip, and a jump away.
I think because so much of the SEC country is like, it's drivable, right? I mean, so many things are drivable. It's drivable, but you're not doing it without, like, you might do it once a year or something like that.
This gets back to actually one of the problems. Random tangent of one of the problems with the Pac-12, right? We used to hear this from like Larry Scott and the other commissioners, like, our road trips are not really very drivable. Like Arizona State to Eugene takes forever. Like, so we have a hard time just getting like, unlike with like Auburn and Georgia, where you have the other team's fans come over, that doesn't really happen in the Pac-12. Anyway, pour one out for the Pac-12.
Speaking of treks, Ralph, we were Bruce and I were waiting to start this recording because Ralph had to get from which airport? JFK?
So I flew into JFK this morning. I was coming back from Columbus. I gave myself an extra day in Columbus because my brother lives there, and it was a little cheaper to fly back today. And so when I arrive at the airport, especially when I fly into JFK, I take mass transit home. There's an air train that gets you to the LIRR.
Oh, I know it. It takes forever.
it was fine today. Barely an hour from the time I texted you, or a little over the hour to the time I walked in. Sometimes that's 90 minutes, but today it was really quick. Unlike Bruce and Stu, I usually don't have a limo waiting for me to bring me home.
Well, that's definitely Bruce.
I'm a common man, and I take mass transportation. Then I walk from Atlantic Avenue to my apartment about a half a mile with my bag. And here I am. So it worked out great. This
Bruce,
morning.
Ralph, I don't know, maybe the AP didn't have a travel budget, but like here at the Athletic, you can expense an Uber. Like you don't have to take $2.50 mass transit ride.
No, I understand that. I just prefer the mass transportation. The traffic gets very bad, and sometimes that car ride ends up taking longer than the mass transit. So I like again, I'm a man of the people. I like to be with the common folks. So I love my mass transportation here in New York. Anyway, so we're here. But the thing I also need to do now is I need to start filling out my AP ballot for this week, which is a little challenging, more challenging than normal week one, because a bunch of really good teams lost. But that's also because a bunch of really good teams played each other. So I don't know. I got some ideas, guys. I don't know if I'm asking it for advice or as much as, or maybe to you to critique me, but why don't we just start at number one? It seems the obvious thing to do here is just put Ohio State number one, right? That's what I'm probably going to do here. Is that a good place to start?
I think it's a good place to start. I mean, look, going into the year, one of the bigger questions I had, and I definitely had it going into the weekend, was how's this going to work out with Matt Patricia running the defense? Because Jim Knowles did an amazing job. He obviously moved on to Penn State. They also have to replace like 8 or 9 guys who on the defensive side of the ball alone who were drafted. I know they got a bunch of really good players on the back end, especially Caleb Downs, but that was a big question mark, because like I thought about this a lot over the weekend was, when Sark went up against Wink Martindale, another longtime NFL defense coordinator, Wink Martindale took a minute to like figure out what he needed to do. Well, clearly Matt Patricia came in ready for it, and he aced the test, and I thought he outcoached Sark that day. I thought Julian Sayin looked really, really good. So the only place I could say there would be a quibble from it, and I wouldn't have it with you, is just LSU looked really good. They won on the road in a hostile place. I thought Garrett Nussmeier was much better than Cade Klubnik. I thought Blake Baker has done a terrific job with the defense. You saw some of the transfers. I mean, Brian Kelly talked about tripling the payroll. It looked like it, right? You got a shutdown corner from Virginia Tech. You got a good center also from Virginia Tech. Those guys really shined in the first week. But I think you're right. I mean, Stu may argue because he likes to argue, but I think it should be Ohio State. No, Stu?
Well, I just assumed, right? Because that's just how the poll works. If you're number 3 and you beat number 1 and number 2 played Nevada, you move up to number 1. Like never even gave it any thought until yet again, I'm going to invoke Ari's name. He said on Twitter this morning, he's like, I don't see how it could be anybody else. And I was like, well, there is a case for LSU for exactly what Bruce said. I mean, if you don't do the automatic, this is where they were ranked last week, that, if you actually, as the committee claims they do, start from scratch every week, I think you could make a legit case for LSU. I would do Ohio State just because I think at the end of the day, Texas, I think it's all a guess, right, will prove to be a tougher team to beat than Clemson. But don't underestimate the importance of LSU going into Death Valley at night and winning as opposed to Ohio State winning at home.
Yeah, tough road game. At this point, I think I'm leaning actually LSU number 2. Just go with the results and go Ohio State, LSU, Miami as my top 3, and then start slotting in like the good teams that I had highly ranked but didn't really play anybody. Penn State, Georgia. Maybe next, slot in Texas behind Georgia. That seems okay. The other thing, too, you have to also understand, like we're talking about my ballot as opposed to just like who should be number 1 when the poll comes out. I was not as high on Clemson. Basically, Bruce has been bullying me into putting Clemson, rating Clemson more highly than I think. I had them at 6 coming into the season. And even then, I felt like that was a little bit of a stretch. I in some ways, I felt almost a little more comfortable with them, maybe 7, 8, 9. But I wanted to defer to all their returning production and their stars. So the fact that Clemson didn't, LSU really controlled that game. That could have been a 24-10 game. The fact that LSU beats Clemson, there's a little something there for me of like, well, it sort of validates the fact that I'm a little skeptical on Clemson. And, Miami and Notre Dame, that was pretty much a toss-up. Like, so also all the teams that I lost, that lost the big games, Bruce, I can't imagine any of them not being in the top 10. Like, even though I'm doubting Clemson, I'll probably have them like 9th, maybe 10th, but probably 9th. The first sketch I did was about 9th.
It was a little surprising for me to hear you say Miami at 3. Now, they did have a really good win, albeit at home, against a good team, Notre Dame. I thought what popped for me with Miami was Notre Dame has a good offensive line, and I thought Miami got after them, especially the edges. It was Mesidor, it was Bain, obviously. The defense did look much improved under Corey Heatherman. There was some stuff that was like, a little bit, but it wasn't a lot of it. And as we talked about before on the last episode, I do think the receiving core is interesting with Carson Beck, and they, I feel like they have the talent, especially with Carson Beck and the new kind of wave of receivers. I think they have the talent to be a top 5 team if the defense steps up as it does. What I'm curious from your perspective, Stu, because we talked a lot about coming out of the Texas-Ohio State game. I feel like Ralph and I are kind of similar on where we stand on Arch Manning. It wasn't a great opening performance, but it was on the road against a tough team, and you're breaking in an entirely new offensive line, 4 new starters of the 5. You seemed really down on Arch. And also they struggle in the red zone. Like, seems like it's a real thing right now. Sark has to get that figured out. And I think he will, but he has to. From what you saw and how you feel about them, like, where did you have Texas? I would ask you this. Where did you have Texas in your preseason, and where would you have them now, and how do you feel about them?
I technically didn't fill out a preseason top 25. I guess my number 1 was Penn State because I picked them to win the national championship. I think it's important to keep perspective and say Texas went on the road and lost by a touchdown to the defending national champion. I have no reason to, like, if I was a voter, send them spiraling down the poll. In fact, Ralph, you said you'd probably slot Georgia ahead of Texas. I would do reverse. Not a big deal.
And I might.
There's something to be said for we actually got to see these teams and they challenged themselves, right? Unlike a Penn State or a Georgia. I'm curious, guys, what to do with Notre Dame, because in theory, going on the road and losing to a top 10 team by 3 points is not something to be all that alarmed about. But there were some alarming things. Like Bruce said, the offensive line got dominated. I think CJ Carr looked like the makings of somebody special, but it wasn't like he dominated the performance. So let's see, Notre Dame, I don't know where you had them on your individual ballot, Ralph. They were number 6 in the AP poll, and the 2 teams behind them were Oregon and Alabama. Oregon played an FCS team. Obviously, Alabama's not going to be there. So, like, is there a case to be made for just leaving them where they were?
I think I had them originally sketched out as falling. So there were 7 on my original. You guys are definitely making me rethink the Texas thing. Should Texas be ahead of the Penn State, Georgia section there? And Miami is the one I might be overly aggressive, because Miami was another one. Like, again, they were top 10 in the poll, but they were number 15 on my ballot. So that would be a big jump. But again, it's early in the season. I do want to reward teams for winning these big games. We will adjust as these results go along. Right. So Notre Dame, I think my original sketch was, something around leaving them in the same place, give or take, maybe 8. The Alabama thing is the interesting one, right? The Alabama-Florida State dynamic. Florida State was unranked and no reason to be ranked. I was incredibly bullish on Alabama. I had, they were 8th, I think, coming into the season, but I had them number 3 in my preseason poll because they had the most talented roster in the country and they were really set on both lines, which was made them a little bit of an anomaly among the top teams, having both offensive and defensive lines coming back pretty much intact with a lot of talent and a lot of experience. So I don't know. I mean, like if you're under the impression that like, oh, you shouldn't rank Alabama at all, well, then how do you reward Florida State for what I think is going to turn out to be a good win? And then where do I put Florida State? Because am I over ranking Florida State? Because maybe Alabama is on the way to going 7-5. That seems highly unlikely. I hate to be like, oh, we don't know anything. We know some stuff. So the Alabama thing is going to be the Alabama Florida State one. I'm tempted to be aggressive with Florida State and get them maybe just outside the top 10.
Okay, Ralph, I want to start with the Alabama piece and let's work off of Florida State for a minute. So about what you said, like the one guy I think they could not lose on the defense, they lost for maybe the first month of the season, Tim Keenan. He's the really the heart and soul of the defense in the middle of the defensive line. He's a team captain. That hurt. He's got the ankle injury. Having said that, what really was kind of eye-opening was they didn't look like they were physical. They didn't look like they were even playing hard, and whether your team captain is there in the huddle and on the field or not, the other 10 guys or the 11 guys who are playing, what is their excuse? It's an opener. It's you don't get that many opportunities to play college football games. It's not like a 162 game baseball season. Like that would be really, to me, the biggest, I don't want to say indictment of what it feels like is going on right now in Alabama. And I came out of Tuscaloosa when I went down there 2 weeks ago, pretty optimistic about them. I thought the offense is going to be a lot better. Now, Jam Miller, who's the other player who didn't play for them against Florida State, he was probably the most impressive player I saw there on that day. They definitely missed him. But having said all that, it was just like, we've seen plenty of examples of teams where I go back to this, a lot, where Ohio State is hosting Oregon. It's back when Joe Moorhead's the offensive coordinator and Cristobal is the head coach at Oregon, and they don't have Kayvon Thibodeau, right? And that's their best defensive player. And you're thinking they're going to get drilled here in Columbus. And they end up winning, not handily, but I think the final score might have been by 2 touchdowns. Anthony Brown's the quarterback. It wasn't like this was like, how did this happen? Well, I think part of how it happened was everybody else raised their game up a lot. And for whatever reason, that didn't happen. The opposite happened. So as we're talking about Alabama, I did notice this, on Monday, you're sitting there thinking, okay, Feinbaum's coming for this, right? Like this is going to get ugly. I think we all, genuinely like and respect Kalen DeBoer. I think he's a really, really good coach. But you're like, okay, this is going to get messy because it's already, heading in that direction. You've lost already to a bunch of unranked teams in a short amount of time, relatively. Well, on Monday morning, Dan Orlovsky, who's one of ESPN's most prominent voices in football, not just college football, basically comes out and goes, I don't know if he's going to survive September. Now, we know he's not going to get fired this month, but just when that point gets thrown in from a big platform into the discussion, into the conversation, like Ralph, I'll go back to you. Like, do you think that matters? How much does that matter if it matters?
I think it can matter, especially at a place like Alabama. I remember when Rich Rodriguez was at Michigan, and it was bad from the start, right? Like at least Kalen won 9 games last year at Alabama. With Rich at Michigan, it was off from the start. And that's a great example. There are others, but that's a really good example of so much negativity builds up around these big programs. And you can tell, coaches will say, only matters what's inside the building. Don't get distracted, blah, 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 blah. Man, you start managing just the negativity, it just envelops your program. And I feel like you start chasing, fixing this and fixing that. And what do we do about this? And Again, I don't want to overestimate the outside noise, but I do think that that negativity can weigh on players and coaches in a way that it makes you get outside of your process. Coaches talk all the time about process, but Stu, like I just, I don't know where you are on this, but I feel like that stuff is real. And at the top of the food chain programs, it can become a burden that actually does impact what happens on the field.
Absolutely. I think we've seen many examples of where if you make a bad first impression and dig yourself a hole with the fan base, it's almost impossible to climb out of it. And I'll give you a good example. Charlie Strong at Texas, who succeeded Mac Brown. It felt like every week from almost the first season was a referendum on his job. Like, is Charlie Strong going to make it? And he lasted 3 seasons, I think. And I remember, Bruce, you were a sideline reporter then, and you were around the program, and it was like, these guys were so tight because I think it got to the players like, we've got to win or our coach is going to get fired. Like, we're playing to save our coach's job. And that is a lot of pressure. To back up a second, I think it would take an absolute disaster for Greg Byrne to fire Kalen DeBoer after 2 seasons. His buyout is $63 million.
$60 million.
And Greg Byrne he's one of the ones always saying, like, our athletic department has no money. We can't afford to pay the players, da-da-da-da-da. But beyond that, it's just, everybody knows this was a very daunting situation he walked into. And it would be very hard to pull the plug that quickly. Here's my it was a very alarming performance, right? I mean, especially coming off last year. Is it possible, if they end up turning it around, and I don't know, I mean, does this speak to the challenge of every Florida State starter on offense was new? It was 10 transfers and a freshman. How do you prepare for that in the offseason? And new coordinators and new schemes. Like, it's Sonny Dykes talked about that with the Colorado opener 2 years ago. You have no idea what you're preparing for. You try to get tape.
I think they knew what they were going to see scheme-wise. Tony White's going to kind of do what he's done from that Rocky Long tree. I think, Gus Malzahn, I think this is a little different than hey, what's Belichick coming with? Hey, what's Dion got? Because Dion's got different guys in position here or whatever. I do think this was a little different in terms of not knowing. You had guys who had pretty fully formed offensive and defensive schematic profiles.
So guys, I did a little research. I did a little research knowing we were going to be talking about this. I was trying to find, when's the last time, if any, that a top 10 team got its ass kicked in the first game, turned around and still had a great season. And here's a couple examples recently where it didn't. Number 5 LSU losing 45-24 to Florida State to open the 2023 season. Jaden Daniels did win the Heisman, but they went 9-3 in the regular season. They would not have made the 12-team playoff. Clemson lost 28-7 to Duke to open that season and ended up losing 4 games. 2021, Miami lost 44-13 to Alabama and ended up going 7-5. Anyway, here's the modern precedent for this. 2016, USC lost 52-3. They actually were not a top 10 team. They were a top 20 team. Lost 52-3 to Alabama in the opener and ended up going to the Rose Bowl and winning the Rose Bowl. There was one key thing there, though. They switched to Sam Darnold. I think, Bruce, was that after the 3rd game, maybe?
Yeah, and I think something, Stu, unless you're telling me Keelan Russell is going to take over. Like, I don't think Alabama lost the way they did because of Ty Simpson. He didn't play great, but I think that was the worst part to me. They were bad in the trenches. And I think they were bad on defenses. As we were talking about this a little bit. Billy Napier was really on the hot seat, and I think what the dynamic here is a little different. I think your example of Charlie Strong is notable, but I think it's the guy who, it's what are you replacing? What's the situation you're going into, right? There's really no precedent to be like, oh, you're replacing Nick Saban. He's the greatest coach of all time. And then you got Kalen DeBoer, a really successful, complete outsider coming into something that is so different, So, I mean, it's not like they hired, a basketball coach to replace him, but it's really different, right? So I don't know of how many examples where all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, this is not going to work. And it just keeps mounting. Like Napier, I feel like to a large degree got himself off the hot seat last year because the team never gave up on him. But it wasn't like this much, like Florida fires coaches, he's basically jumped on a carousel essentially. Whereas DeBoer, again, he knew what he was getting himself into to a large degree. Like this is the world he's going to be living in. I just don't know of a coach who's like, I think it's going to get way more toxic this week as it kind of builds to this. And then they have Georgia like in a couple of weeks. They should be 2-1 when they get into that game. But if I just think that, how he manages the discourse is one thing. It's how the players deal with it. To me, that's the part that's way different. It's like, you can say all the stuff you want, but it's like, how do you keep in this day and age, the players and social media and manage all that where it doesn't get unwieldy? Because it happens more than I think coaches want to own up to.
So I don't want to write Kalen DeBoer's Alabama career obit yet, but I do find myself wondering, like, he's got a pretty good resume. He was only at Washington for 2 years, and a lot of the players who did really well at Washington for him were Chris Peterson's players. He was only at Fresno for a couple of years, and that's a program that tends to be well run, right? That's a program that changes coaches, but they generally have a lot of success there. But what made me feel confident that Kalen DeBoer sort of fell under this category that I use a lot of, like, winners win. I think it's important that he did well in NAIA and lower divisions. Like, I think that is a sign, generally speaking, guys like Lance Leipold and Brian Kelly, that usually is a good sign that you are going to be a good coach, even if you win at the lower levels. But, I think of Scott Frost and I think of Tom Herman as the best examples of guys who had a couple of good years and quickly became the hot name, and bam, they were in huge jobs, and essentially they were in jobs where they were over their head. And again, like I say, DeBoer's got a longer resume than that. But when you start peeling back what he did at Washington and what he did at Fresno, all of a sudden you go, Again, I don't know if we're there yet. I don't want to be there yet on Kalen, but you do find yourself wondering, man, was it a little too much too soon? Not to mention such a different dynamic from where he was to where he is now. So, story yet to be written, but it was such a bad sign on Saturday because it also harkened back to what the problems were last year, which is another issue. If this was isolated and it didn't sort of echo what we saw last year when they lost games to teams that they shouldn't have, it might not be quite so much panic in Tuscaloosa. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll start looking ahead to week 2's games. So to give you a little idea of what this slate of games looks like this weekend, not quite as appealing as last weekend. A newly minted ranked team, Florida State, plays East Texas A&M. So we're probably not going to find out much more, no matter where Florida State ends up on my ballot and no matter where they end up in the rankings. And again, I'm still playing with the idea of maybe they're a top 10-ish team, a little outside the top 10. I don't know if we're going to get that validated or not this weekend, guys, as again, the slate comes down a little bit in terms of the drama. Though I will say, when we start doing that, that's often when we have some of the really crazy results, right? It's when when we don't have the big mega games on the schedule where we get something really crazy that happens.
By the way,
you
do you guys
basically
even
got
know where
one.
East Texas A&M is?
I do not.
Okay.
East Texas?
East Texas A&M is a renamed school. I can't remember off the top of my head who it used to be. Do you remember, Bruce?
Is it Commerce? What did it used to be? Texas A&M Commerce? Okay.
Yes.
If you had asked me off the top, where is East Texas A&M, I would have just been like, Billy Lucci's backyard. I have no idea, but
because Texas A&M is in the east of Texas. Like Texas A&M itself, the actual Texas A&M is in East Texas.
We have one marquee game, obviously, off the top. Michigan going to Oklahoma, and Bruce in particular, but myself as well, kind of raved about Bryce Underwood's debut, but that was against New Mexico. Brent Venables, great defensive mind, is going to have all sorts of things to confuse Bryce Underwood, I would think, in the game plan. this is also though I've been hyping up John Mateer all off season. Here's your chance. If you're gonna steal the spotlight and assert yourself as a national name, this is the week to do it. And I don't know for a fact that Michigan's going to have a really good defense, but they usually do. So, Bruce, what do you make of this matchup?
Well, it's going to be a little harder without Jayshon Barnum, who's one of their best defensive players, who got kicked out of the New Mexico game in the second half. So he's going to be suspended for the first half of the game. Sharon Moore Michigan tried to get that overturned, and it was denied. So they're going to miss him. I think Oklahoma is going to be so much better on offense this year, not just with Mateer, who is very much Baker Mayfield-like. He's very much in like backstory where he was overlooked in the recruiting process and he got a shot at Washington State. He was headed to Central Arkansas, and then Washington State jumped in Eric Morris, who's one of the guys who was like had Cam Ward at Incarnate Word and, offered Baker when he was at Washington State as an assistant. He's really talented. He's got the same edge and chip on his shoulder that Baker has. He's a really good runner. I think if people haven't seen him, he's a very dynamic runner. And I think with Ben Arbuckle the offense coordinator coming from Washington State with him, they're ready. And I think the receiving core is pretty good. Like last year it was banged up. They had all sorts of issues in Norman. I think this is going to be a big challenge for Michigan. As you said, I loved what I saw from Bryce Underwood, but this is such a bigger challenge than what he had last week. And I'm not sure that they have enough weapons around him. Justice Haynes, the Alabama transfer, looked really good last week. I think it'll be a lot tougher against OU at OU. I'm fascinated to see how the guy I'm most interested in this weekend is Bryce Underwood. I feel like I'm going to see John Mateer light it up. I want to see, I think there'll be wow moments from Bryce. I just don't know, will there be some mistakes that end up costing them, in what turned out to be a close game?
Yeah, I find myself, I've been a little bullish on Michigan and thinking that Underwood would be good, but I just don't know if this point in the season, and I am a little worried about who his receivers are. It doesn't look like anything really popped against New Mexico in terms of having a guy who is who grows into being a 1 or even a 1A as a receiver. So that probably limits him. And I also do wonder if you're Michigan, my sense, the vibes I'm feeling out of Michigan is like, hey, we'll see what happens in week 2 against Oklahoma. He might not be up for this, but that's okay. What happens here will probably be a good building block for when we get into the Big Ten. And so, it's not a house money game. We don't have those in college football, but you do get the sense that there isn't a ton of pressure on Michigan that they have to win this, right? It's almost like we're going to see what happens here. And even if we come out on the losing end, we might be better off by just simply having played this game with our 5-star high ceiling freshman quarterback.
They did have one receiver pop a little bit. They did have Channing Goodwin, redshirt freshman. Yeah. But again, New Mexico. Should we give our picks on this game real quick?
Yeah, let's pick it. What do you think? What do you think, Bruce?
I am going with the home team, Oklahoma. More experienced quarterback, more established system. Because at Michigan, you're also breaking in. Chip Lindsey's coming in. I just think I might feel differently if it was in Ann Arbor. I probably wouldn't, though, to be honest. I'm a big believer right now in Mateer. I like them kind of by double digits in this game.
Wow.
What do you think, Stu?
Yeah, I like Oklahoma, but I was going to say by 3, by 7, something like that. I like Oklahoma because of Mateer. I just can't say enough. I think he's going to be one of the elite quarterbacks in the country this year.
Yeah, I've got a feeling that I'm just super interested to see what Venables and Arbuckle do here to sort of reassert themselves. Again, there's a lot more pressure on Oklahoma here. Oklahoma loses that game, the folks in Norman will be where the folks in Tuscaloosa are. I understand Michigan's good, But the fact of the matter is, like, after what happened last year at Oklahoma, those folks really need convincing. They've had 2 losing seasons in 3 years under Venables. So there's a lot of folks that are wondering, like, hey, man, what's the deal here? The seat could get very hot. And while, they're not going to fire him after the game.
I think
it already is hot. Yeah. It already is hot. It already is. What else is catching your attention this weekend, Stu?
Definitely Cyhawk, Iowa State. But coming into the season, I'm definitely picking Iowa. I had Iowa in the playoff. It was not the most impressive debut for Mark Gronowski against an FCS opponent. I didn't watch it, but Bruce did. He said he didn't look good. But I will say there's one thing going for Iowa in this game. Kirk Ferentz going for the Big Ten all-time wins record over Woody Hayes. Hard to pick against that, but we saw Iowa State look really good in the game in Ireland. Rocco Becht. I'll stick with the Hawkeyes though.
All right, I'm going to pick up on that. Like you said, I watched the game against UAlbany, and Gronowski, there was some yikes moments, to be honest. Like, I remember saying this on the air at one point in our studio. It's like, yeah, somebody kind of described him to me as he's like the Tim Tebow of FCS. He was a decorated quarterback. He's a big dude. He's like 6'2", 235. He can run, but he's more of a power runner. And then he made a couple of throws and he had off-season shoulder surgery. And you wondered, is he 100%? Like, there was a couple of throws to wide open receivers, one in particular. And it was one of those throws where you're just kind of like, whoa, what was that? And, I went back, the guy accounted for 130 touchdowns running and throwing in college, completed 64% of his passes. But it looked a little like the Tim Tebow of FCS at times the other night. It looked like the Tim Tebow of the NFL with some of those yikes moments of throws. They got a really good offensive line, as they almost always do with Kirk Ferentz. And their defense is going to be good with Phil Parker. I really like how Iowa State is playing. I mean, I've been bullish on them preseason. I picked them to win the Big 12. I picked them as a playoff team. Rocco Becht looked really, really good so far. He looked good in Ireland, completed 95% of his passes, broke Seneca Wallace's school completion percentage last week. I think they're playing with a ton of confidence. He's the tone setter. I like the Cyclones. I'm glad Stu and I are on opposite ends of this one. I'm riding ISU. Ralph, who's right?
I guess, for a while there, Matt Campbell just couldn't figure out how to beat Iowa, right? And I think he lost like 6 or 7 straight against them. That's cleared up a bit the last couple of years. I think Iowa State's won 2 of the last 3. I was a little skeptical. In this case, you taught me, you pushed me in the right direction, Bruce. I was a little skeptical at Iowa State coming into this year. You were far more bullish. I think it is notable that they played so well last week, even against an FCS opponent, especially considering how Kansas State was in a death match with North Dakota coming off of Ireland. So turning around and being really good. Iowa State, I'll certainly have them ranked this week. So I will. Where is it, Stu? It's got to be at. It's in Ames. Iowa.
Ames.
It's in Ames. I'll go with the Cyclones this week. Yeah. What else are we looking at? I mean, we brought up before the show in the show meeting that suddenly like Missouri, Kansas is a big game, right? Like that's kind of an interesting one with Kansas playing pretty well. And we look at Missouri and they've been good. And also that like their schedule lays out pretty well. So not to mention just simply getting that rivalry played, right? Just getting that heated rivalry played is notable. So, kind of got my eye on that one.
I was at the famous 2-3 Missouri Kansas game at Arrowhead. I love that rivalry. I'm glad they're playing. Mizzou should win. If Kansas wins, that's a huge win for that program and for the Big 12. I'm interested in Oregon, Oklahoma State. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe it's going to be a 40-point game. Oklahoma State went winless.
You're crazy.
Yeah. Really?
Yes.
I feel like
it was going to be a blowout even with Hoss Haney. Hoss Haney looked pretty good, and then he got hurt at Oklahoma State. Now,
hold on. Have you not seen enough examples already where the team that was bad last year flushes the roster, brings in new guys, and is a lot better? I mean, it just happened in Tallahassee. It could happen for the Cowboys, and also this is our first chance to see Dante Moore in a meaningful game for Oregon. I think he should do well. I have no idea. Like, that's the curiosity is not, if they end up winning by 30, so be it. Like, I want to see the Dante Moore era Ducks for the first time.
I guess I would say he might have faced a tougher challenge last week against Montana State. Is that a little harsh?
Damn, no respect for Mike Gundy. As soon as you rule Mike Gundy out is when he surprises you.
And that is true. So I really should pull back. I mean, that was a little tongue in cheek, and I should pull back on that because it is true. Like Gundy is the guy who will suddenly be contending for the Big 12 this year as soon as you throw dirt on him. So I will be cautious about that. What about you, Bruce?
I think Stu's crazy to even bring this one up. You got
we already established
give us
that.
one more game. One more.
We've established that for 12 years that you think Stu is crazy.
I do think Stu is crazy. I do.
I didn't pick them to win. I just said I'm interested.
Oh, I'm interested too. I mean, Flores, they like. He's the guy who's taken over at quarterback. He hadn't been healthy the first 2 years. I just think Oregon's defense is really good, and I think it's going to be a blowout, to be honest. I think I'm with Ralph on that. So I'll give you a game. USF at Florida. I think USF looked pretty good. If Byron Brown can be a little more accurate, and I don't know, that's probably a big if, but he can really run. They have a bunch of athletes. They smoked Boise last week. Now they're going to play a team that is much better in the trenches. Like I feel like I'm yelling from the mountaintop about how good Florida is like O-line, D-line, but Lagway's really talented. I think they're one of the 12 most talented teams in college football. I like Billy Napier, what he's done there. I get it. Like they finished with some momentum. But USF, they looked better than Florida should win this game. And if they don't, it's gonna get a little hot again in Gainesville, but don't sleep on USF. They play at this breakneck tempo. I think that game will be much closer than the game in Eugene, Oregon.
Yeah, and
I bet
just
it will
a crazy schedule. Just a crazy schedule too, right? You start the season with Boise State, Florida, and then Miami. USF. Just
good for them. Good for Alex Golish. Ralph, I want to ask you a question though, because Stu picked it, but what are you on Kansas, Missouri? Do you feel like the same way he does?
I feel like that's a little bit more of, I don't know what the line is in that. We haven't checked in with our friends at BetMGM, but my lean is that that's kind of a toss up. I feel like I've really drastically underrated Missouri this year. I think everybody else is giving them a lot more respect than I am. So I'll be open-minded that they'll win. I think they'll probably win this game. But again, this is an interesting validation game for me with Missouri. Are they as good as others think? Because I've been a little cool on them with so much offensive turnover, and we'll see if Bo Prabula, he tried to say, is more than just a good runner.
The spread is 6.5 for the Tigers. I will say something that'll probably get me kicked out of the house. But I feel like I'm riding with Jalen Daniels still. I know I'm going to have to recuse myself from all Jalen Daniels conversations after this one, but they've looked really good. They haven't played anybody that good, but Fresno's not awful. And they torched them. I don't know. I feel like, we all have a lot of respect for Lance Leipold. Not that we don't have respect for what Eli has done in Columbia, but I kind of like this Kansas team, and I think they're dangerous because he's playing with so much confidence as long as he stays healthy. I think this is a really sneaky good game. To me, it's in that with Cyhawk. When I was looking at the schedule a week ago, I was like, man, this is a bad week aside from Oklahoma, Michigan. And I know Big Noon's going to Cyhawk, but this game to me is very interesting. Plus you have the whole Big 12 SEC vibe. Obviously the SEC got it with Baylor not holding serve, and Auburn went in there and won. But I'm kind of curious to see, is Kansas a real player in the Big 12 title race? If they win this game, I think they validate that.
All right, guys, we'll be back on Thursday, and we will answer your mailbag questions. Send your questions to theaudiblepod@gmail.com. Also, a friendly reminder, we are on YouTube now. You can watch every episode of The Audible as soon as it comes out. Subscribe to @Audible Show on YouTube to have those videos in your feed. We will see you next time.